Magicka Dragon Knight is, in my opinion, one of the coolest specs in ESO. They have the best looking abilities, some very interesting class mechanics, a hyper aggressive playstyle, and in the right hands they can be devastating to their enemies. However, a challenge I've always struggled with on a Mag DK is finding a good balance between damage and sustain, and dealing with their low mobility. So this build attempts to remedy those things without sacrificing that class identity that makes Mag DK so much fun in the first place. This is a light armor Destro Resto build optimized for battlegrounds, but it also works great in any PvP setting. It's also a good build for players who are new to PvP because the gear is pretty easy to get and the playstyle is simple yet very effective and fun. For my race, I'm a Breton, mainly because they have excellent sustain and Dragon Knights need all the help they can get in that department. For my Mundus Stone, I'm using the Atronach for even more sustain help. I'm using standard Tri-Stat food and standard Tri-Stat potions. Here's a look at the stats. I'll also put a link to the UESP build in the description, so if you want to take a closer look, you can do that there. I'm putting 16 points into health, which puts my max health at about 24,000, which I think is a pretty comfortable amount in no CP. The rest of the points are put into Magicka, which puts our max Magicka at 26,000, and our max stamina is just shy of 15,000, which is a pretty good amount for a Magicka build. Magicka recovery is 1500, which seems a little low, but as we'll see, we have other sources of sustain that don't show up here on the stat sheet. Spell damage is 3300 and spell crit is 30% on the front bar. A quick overview of the gear. I'm using Grothdar for my monster set, Elfbane for one of the 5-piece sets, and Overwhelming Surge for the other 5-piece set. 5 light, 1 medium, 1 heavy, all M-Pen with Tri-Stat glyphs on all 7 pieces. I definitely do recommend using Tri-Stat glyphs, but if you can't afford it, you can just use Magicka glyphs and adjust your attribute points to get your health and stamina back in a comfortable spot. On the jewelry, I'm using 3 infused pieces with 1 recovery glyph and 2 damage glyphs, and for my weapons I'm using a sharpened flame staff on the front bar with a flame enchantment, and a powered resto staff on the back bar with a weapon damage enchantment. Let's start with Elfbane. This set comes from one of the Cyrodiil Elite gear vendors, or you can just buy it from guild traders for fairly cheap. The 5-piece bonus extends the duration of all flame damage abilities by 5 seconds, and so of course being a Magicka Dragon Knight with nothing but flame damage abilities, we get a significant benefit from this set. But really the main reason I'm using this set is that it also increases the duration of Grothdar, which means Grothdar now has a potential 100% uptime. Now you might be thinking, a Dragon Knight without Bloodspawn, what's going on here? But believe it or not, Dragon Knights can use other monster sets besides Bloodspawn, and Grothdar is actually an excellent choice for a few reasons. For one, the 1-piece bonus is Magicka rather than stamina recovery, and while stamina recovery is useful, I think the extra max Magicka is just a little more useful in this build. It also deals a lot of damage in an 8-meter radius, which is a pretty big area, and the damage that it deals is flame damage, which is especially valuable to a Dragon Knight because of their combustion passive. And so with Grothdar dealing flame damage in such a large area, there's a good chance that it's applying that burning status effect to multiple enemies, and since the combustion passive has no cooldown, you're getting that Magicka return every single time that happens. So Grothdar ends up not only being an excellent damage set, but an excellent sustain set as well, and what's cool is that's only really the case for a Dragon Knight because of their unique passives. Now the downside is, of course, that we're not as tanky as we would be with Bloodspawn, but as with most of my builds, we compensate for that by utilizing movement, good positioning, and a strong offense to avoid taking too much damage. So as long as you play smart, staying alive won't be too much of an issue. The headpiece drops in Vaults of Madness, which is a really fun dungeon, and it's pretty easy. Overwhelming Surge. This is another set that gives us both damage and sustain. The 5-piece bonus deals AoE shock damage in an 8-meter radius, and it restores 15% of the damage dealt as Magicka. So again, like Grothdar, the more enemies there are around you, the more you benefit from this proc. These two sets are a perfect pair. They both deal a ton of AoE damage in the exact same 8-meter radius. They both restore Magicka while dealing damage, and thanks to Elfbane, they both have a potential 100% uptime. On top of all that, when both sets proc, it just looks super cool. This set drops in Tempest Island, which is another fairly easy dungeon. The reason I'm using the Sharpen trait on the Fire Staff is because I'm relying on set procs for a lot of the damage, and so reducing my enemy's resistance is the best way to get them to take more of that damage. And I'm using a Flame Glyph because in addition to the extra damage, it also has a very high chance to apply the burning status effect, and so it gives me a little extra help with sustain. I like using the Powered trait on my back bar just to make my heals hit a little harder. Infused would also be a great choice because it'll buff up your weapon damage glyph and allow you to have it active 100% of the time rather than only half the time. So both are great choices, and I'm still kind of on the fence about it, but I think I prefer powered because it helps compensate for the fact that we are kind of squishy and we still have a truly ample amount of damage. Let's talk about the skill bars. Molten Whip is my main spammable and main burst attack. While slotted, when you cast any other Ardent Flame ability, you increase the damage of your next Molten Whip by 33% and increase your weapon and spell damage by 75, and that can stack up to 3 times. So when you get all 3 stacks, you'll have an extra 225 spell damage, and your next whip basically hits for double damage. And if you notice, aside from the ultimate, every ability on the front bar is an Ardent Flame ability, so it will be generating those Molten Whip stacks constantly. Engulfing Flames, this is an AoE spammable dot. It's a great tool for keeping Nightblades pulled out of stealth. It also makes enemies take additional flame damage, which is of course great for us. Burning Embers is a single target dot, and it gives a huge burst heal when it expires, and recasting it on a target early counts to trigger the heal as well, so this can be a great tool for healing up while staying aggressive. Empowering Chains is our gap closer. It also gives us 2 uses of Empower after using it, which makes our combo hit just a little harder, and it gives us Major Expedition after using it, which I like because it makes me just a little bit more difficult to target while I'm up in my enemy's face. Cauterize is a burst heal / hot hybrid. It can heal you or an ally, and for the amount of healing that it does, it has a really low Magicka cost. It also gives us our major crit buff while slotted, which is very nice. And for my main offensive ultimate, I'm using the Destro Staff ult Eye of the Storm. I was reluctant to use an ultimate other than Leap at first, but I gotta say, as soon as I started using it, it became clear that this is the right ult for this build. It deals a huge amount of flame damage, again in an 8-meter radius that follows you around, so it stacks perfectly with our 2 set procs. All combined, that is a ton of AoE, undodgeable, unavoidable damage. Now, oftentimes enemy players will try to run out of your AoE storm, but if that happens, just remember to use your gap closer chains to stay right on top of them. And thanks to Elfbane, we get a full 12 seconds to capitalize on this ult. On the back bar, I'm using Fossilize, of course, for my main stun. It also immobilizes enemies after the stun ends, so it's a great way to make sure they stand still long enough for you to land your big Molten Whip combo. Blessing of Restoration, this is my main burst heal. I use this instead of coagulating blood because it's a lot cheaper, and I can use it to heal myself as well as my allies. Race Against Time gives us Major Expedition and Snare Removal, both of which are extremely valuable. This ability is basically mandatory on all of my Magicka builds. It also gives us Minor Force, but I don't really try and maintain that buff. I'm really just using it for the mobility. Igneous Weapons, this is where we get our major damage buff, and it lasts for almost a full minute, which is really nice. It also gives the damage buffs to your allies, which they probably already have it, but if they forget and let it drop off, you've got them covered. Volatile Armor, this is where we get our major armor buff, so be sure and keep this active at all times. It also releases a spray of spikes in a 10-meter radius, which is a huge area, so this skill also makes a really great anti-stealth tool. And for my back bar ultimate, I'm using the Resto Staff Life Giver ult. I use this to help bail myself or my teammates out of an emergency situation if we need it. Between this ultimate, Blessing of Restoration, and Cauterize, we can be a pretty effective off-healer when the need arises. Keep in mind that with this build, your biggest advantage over other players is damage. You want to focus on killing your enemies faster than they can kill you, rather than trying to play like a typical tanky DK, so remember to stay aggressive. The main offensive combo is pretty simple. If your Eye of the Storm ult is ready, cast that first, then gap close with Empowering Chains and apply your 2 dots, Engulfing Flames and Burning Embers. At this point you already have all 3 Molten Whip stacks, but don't use them yet. First, swap to the back bar and stun them with Fossilize, and if you're light attack weaving, this will also proc your back bar damage glyph. Then swap back to the front bar and hit them with that big Molten Whip, and if they're still not dead, just start over again with Empowering Chains. And I think that brings us to the end of my Magicka Dragon Knight build video for the Harrowstorm patch. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have anything you'd like to ask or share, please feel free to leave a comment or email me at catsparrowhawk@gmail.com. Until next time, good luck out there.